So most of you, if not all of you, will know who Marilyn Monroe was. The most famous female movie star of the 1950s, and even today she is still regarded as the most beautiful woman to have ever lived. But did you know about her death and the troubling events that followed? Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time you're watching this. Today, we are going to be looking at the death of Marilyn Monroe and the terrible events that followed. We are also going to be discussing when her body went missing. I just want to say a humongous thank you to everyone on Patreon, everyone who follows for free, and everyone who physically makes these videos possible. A shout out to Chris, Lawrence, Ben, Louise, Nathan, Russ, Geraldine, Heart of a Daedra, and Kenneth. Thank you so much for your continued support. Now let's get into today's video. This video will feature topics of a very sensitive nature, so viewer discretion is advised.
But I'm not just generally happy. If I'm generally anything, I guess I'm generally miserable. Because I could easily be alone. It doesn't bother me to be alone. Some people I know, they don't like to be alone. I don't mind it.
So before we can speak about Marilyn Monroe's death, we should probably speak about Marilyn Monroe's life. And unfortunately, we're not going to go into the whole of Marilyn Monroe's life, but as I was researching this, I really feel like we should. There is so much that happened in Marilyn Monroe's short life, and I really feel that she deserves a lot more research and a lot more of an in-depth look at her life, which we can do in the future. Marilyn Monroe was born on the 1st of June 1926 in Los Angeles in California. But she was not actually born Marilyn Monroe. That was actually a stage name that she would gain later. She was born Norma Jean Mortensen, and she was baptized Norma Jean Baker. In Hollywood in the 1940s to the 1960s, it was incredibly common that someone would get a stage name. I don't actually think that many people used their real name at all. And if you would like more information about this, I have a video on old Hollywood that explains this a lot better than I'm going to do now. She had an incredibly sad start to her life. She actually ended up in 12 foster homes and an orphanage. Gladys Baker, who was Marilyn Monroe's mother, was actually the reason why she ended up in the care system. Marilyn Monroe's father, of course, also played a role in this, as he left Gladys when Marilyn was very, very young. Gladys Baker suffered with mental torment and depression for a very long time. She would also put Marilyn into her first foster home when Marilyn Monroe was just 2 weeks old. Also, I just want to say that I am going to refer to Marilyn as Marilyn and not Norma, just because then we're always sure of who I'm talking about. But of course, it was much later that Norma Jean became Marilyn Monroe. Unfortunately, in the 1940s, being a caregiver was a sure way to get financial income. If you cared for a child, then the local authorities would give you a small amount of money to look after that child. And so a lot of people actually decided to foster more for the financial gain than it was out of love. And this sadly was the case a lot for Marilyn. There was one point when a foster family really wanted to adopt Marilyn legally, but then Gladys, Marilyn's mother, wouldn't allow this to happen. So Marilyn continued to be passed from foster home to foster home and also end up in an orphanage, which is where she would later say she was so incredibly depressed. And this is a trigger warning because I'm about to say something not very nice, but Marilyn Monroe would also mention that later on in one of her foster homes, she was abused. And again, YouTube does not like me saying certain things, but I think you know what I mean by abused. Because this abuse was so bad and it actually caused significant trauma, Marilyn Monroe actually developed a stutter. Now, the stutter did get better over time, and a lot of people wouldn't actually know that that happened to Marilyn because we never saw it in her films. But it was something really bad that she had to work through. And of course, No one ever got charged for it. The only person who suffered as consequence was Marilyn. There is also more to that, unfortunately, and we will come back to that later. She moved from foster home to foster home because people just simply could not afford to look after her. And eventually, at the age of 15, it was arranged that when Marilyn became 16 years old, she would marry one of the foster home's neighbours. This man was called James Doherty, and he was 21 years old. And you may be thinking, oh God, an arranged marriage, and he's 21 and she's 16. But actually, at the time, that was one of the more respectable age gaps. I mean, there is a lot of history around older men marrying children. But in this particular instance, 21 and 16 wasn't actually that bad, and it was considered quite respectable. And actually, this marriage was arranged just so that Marilyn would be financially looked after. So I guess it was all done out of love, and I guess it's positive. After this, Marilyn would then drop out of school and she would go and get herself a job. The job did not pay very well at all, but this would be the place in which a photographer noticed her, and it would lead to the fame that we now know Marilyn Monroe had. Marilyn Monroe suffered severe mental health problems, and she consistently felt that she wasn't good enough and that she was unlovable. And of course, this goes back to being passed around foster home to foster home as a child, and the fact that her mother simply did not want her. And I understand that Gladys actually had her own sort of mental anguish, and she went through a lot of things like depression, so it's not entirely her fault. But unfortunately, because of that, Marilyn Monroe did suffer as consequence. Gladys's mental health was so bad that at one point she was institutionalized. And it is truly so sad because Marilyn Monroe featured in some really big named films. The multiple Hollywood blockbusters included Some Like It Hot, Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, The 7-Year Itch, and Something's Got to Give. When Marilyn was not in front of the camera, she was an entirely different person. I think just from films and interviews, you can see that she was very charismatic, very confident, but when she was on her own, she was very quiet, very depressed, and she very much kept herself to herself. Her fame grew rapidly. She very quickly captivated audiences. Men wanted to be with her and women wanted to be her. She became a sex symbol, as previously mentioned, and she was noted as the most beautiful woman in the world. But as we know, Hollywood, especially old Hollywood, would wear a mask of like gold and glitter, and beneath the surface it would be dark and evil. And this sadly did not escape Marilyn Monroe. Combined with her depression, she was put on an absolute cocktail of medication. She was also told what to do and when to do it. Her privacy was never respected, and her private life became her public life. And although she was incredibly famous and loved, she was also constantly harassed and criticized. Hugh Hefner was also on the harassment list. Hugh Hefner at the time owned Playboy, and he was obsessed with Marilyn Monroe. So obsessed that he decided to do something absolutely horrible to her. When Marilyn Monroe was not yet a Hollywood starlet, she actually suffered with financial issues. She constantly struggled to pay her bills, and on one occasion she just could not pay a bill for her car. Now the bill was only $50, but she just did not have it. But then a photographer actually offered her the money in exchange for nude photographs. Now, Marilyn felt that she had absolutely no other option because she really needed her car. Without it, she could not do anything, as most of us couldn't. Well, more so now because we have public transport and things like that, but when you've got no money and no car, I just totally understand why Marilyn decided to do this. But Marilyn wasn't actually, super happy to do the photos, she just needed the money. So she actually said to the photographer, please make me look unrecognizable and please ensure that no one ever sees these photos. Even on the model release, she signed it Mona Monroe just to try and hide her identity. But of course, people were awful, and years later, these photos are sold from person to person, and who ends up with them? Oh yes, Hugh Hefner. And Hugh Hefner, couldn't just keep them to himself, which still would have been weird enough, by the way. He decided to publish them in an edition of Playboy. Marilyn was horrified, and the first time that she saw these photos was when she went out and bought the magazine. She never knew this was happening. She never knew that anyone had these photos, and Hugh Hefner never got her consent. He bought the photos, thought it was fair game, and then published it for the world to see. I don't know about you, but I find that incredibly disgusting, especially because he said that he was obsessed with her. He obviously didn't care about her, because he would have reached out to her and told her what he was intending on doing, and then obviously she would have said, don't do that, and they would have had this back and forth, which I don't know how it would have ended, but it would have been more respectful, perhaps. I mean, if he posted them anyway, then that would have been even more disrespectful, but my point is just everyone disrespected Marilyn. Her mistreatment was constant and from every single direction. She was always having medication forced upon her, right to a point that she was developing a dependency on them. And as we know, this dependency would ultimately lead to her demise. She was also said to be fat when she was pregnant. Marilyn actually got pregnant 3 times when married to her 3rd husband, Arthur Miller, but she tragically lost 2 babies to a miscarriage and one of her babies because it was developing outside the womb. Her 2nd husband, Joe DiMaggio, controlled her, or at least he tried to. He was incredibly traditional and believed that women should be traditional too, which obviously meant that a lot of things that Marilyn Monroe decided to do, he just did not care for. He tried to change her and she just refused. But also, to Joe's credit, Marilyn actually had quite a few affairs, and Joe just didn't want to put up with it anymore. And honestly, I can agree with that. That's not great. Marilyn really did love him though, and she tried to make their marriage work, but ultimately it just fell apart. I do not think though that they ever stopped loving each other. I think unfortunately, if Marilyn Monroe's childhood was healthy and then she had met Joe in sort of like a different universe, they would have been perfect for each other. But I think that Marilyn Monroe actually needed a lot of help, and at the time no one cared and the help wasn't available, and so they just clashed a lot, and unfortunately their relationship was really toxic and neither one of them deserved it. She was also seen as a dumb blonde, and in most of her films was considered this way, but she actually had an IQ of 165, which, if you don't know, is way above average. So with this, obviously she was very, very smart, but no one wanted to listen to her because they had portrayed her as this dumb blonde that was objectified. And the things that she actually said were quite opposing of the norms of the time. She wanted more justice for women and more equality for women, and ultimately she just wanted to be loved for who she was, but she was very, very often silenced. And I think that as well can break someone down if you're not allowed to be who you truly are. There is also something that really still needs to be looked into. No one is going to receive justice for it now, but I think that it would be very important for Marilyn, and that is that, do you remember earlier that I said about the abuse that she suffered in one of the foster homes? Well, this was when Marilyn Monroe was just 12 years old, and at 12 years old she actually gave birth to a baby girl. This was all swept under the rug because actually it was deemed as Marilyn's problem, because you should not have intimacy of any kind outside of wedlock, and especially not get pregnant and have a child, which is so messed up because she was abused by one of the dads at these foster homes and then made to go through the hell of pregnancy, having a child, and then being immediately made to give this child away at just 12 years old. I don't know why more hasn't been investigated about that. She also therefore has a child out there that I don't think anyone knows the identity of, and it's just a lot. But researching that, it was just something that I feel we really need to, we as a society that is, need to investigate a lot more into, and hopefully someone will. And if you can believe it, a lot more happened to Marilyn Monroe that was also negative. She had so much negativity and sadness in such a short amount of time. And she did try to change the portrayal that had been put upon her. You know, she was a fantastic comedian, but even so, people could not separate her from the sexual objectification that she was slapped with. She spent the last 3 years of her life feeling suffocated and just drowning in her depression. And despite this, she was still working. She also managed to get a serious role in her very last film, which was called The Misfits. But she never, ever received the support that she so desperately needed. And unfortunately, she would pass away due to substance abuse in her own home. It says that she suffered an overdose, and that's like the reason that she died. But I would like to argue that it was because of the negligence of other people and just people in general letting her down. And that's the real reason that she passed away at the very young age of just 36 years old. So that was all terrible, wasn't it? And I'm very sorry to say, but it only gets worse. Because also, we didn't actually need to summarize Marilyn Monroe's life. We were actually going to be speaking about the after events of Marilyn Monroe's death, but I really wanted to give you some very quick insight and summary to everything that Marilyn went through. And actually, as I say, there is a lot more, but I do feel that she deserves an actual full video on her entire life to really go into it and go through it. But this is now the part that a lot of people don't know about. And this is why we are going to talk about this in today's video. So Marilyn Monroe actually died on August the 4th, 1962. And when Marilyn passed away, the first person to find her was her housekeeper at 1 a.m. on August the 5th. And when I read the next parts, when I was researching this, when I was writing this down, my face literally fell into my hands in disbelief. So the police were not called for 4 hours after her death because there needed to be permission from 20th Century Fox publicity department first. And this apparently took a little bit of time, 4 hours. It's unbelievable, it's unheard of, and if you ever questioned just how much Marilyn Monroe was controlled throughout her life, well, there's evidence, because even in death, she is still being controlled. Her poor body is still being controlled like an object after she has passed away. Again, we're going to be talking about things that are really not nice right now. We do not have concrete proof for this next part, but this is all for you and your speculation because something does not make sense here. So when the police finally arrived, the housekeeper was calm, and in fact she was doing laundry. Unusual? Yes. Marilyn's body was also completely nude, lying face down on her bed, head in her pillow, with her arms down by her sides, which, let's remember, Marilyn Monroe overdosed. And if you know a little bit about overdose and what medications do to your body, no overdose is nice, let's put it that way. No massive amount of medication that your body cannot handle will let you pass away in that position. Unfortunately, you drive around and most people that pass away in that way end up in a very crooked position, let's just say. So that's incredibly troubling that after 4 hours, Marilyn Monroe is found looking like that. The next big problem is that on the way to LA County Morgue, Marilyn Monroe did not turn up there for 6 hours. So the journey between Marilyn's home and the morgue is 30 minutes. So yes, you've heard me correctly. For 5.5 hours, Marilyn Monroe's body went missing. And there is a book out there called Whacked. It's by Jules Asner. And Asner sincerely believes that in this time, Marilyn Monroe was yet again abused. Asner claims with great certainty that on her way to the morgue, the vehicle that was transporting her was intercepted, and then people who are incredibly wealthy, and I can't even really call them people or humans if this is true, but I think you know where I'm going with this, people who were very, very wealthy intercepted the vehicle and took Marilyn's body away for reasons. I don't know if this is true. Show me the coroner reports and I'll believe it. But why did her body go missing for 6 hours, 5.5? And why did no one call the police for 4 hours after she died, or after finding out that she'd passed away? And also, where did she go in those 6 hours between her house and the morgue? If they had said somewhere that the vehicle had, broken down, or it had a flat tire and they couldn't get anyone out and it was awful, but then even then they would have got another vehicle to come and collect Marilyn and take her to the morgue, because they have spares for that reason and for many other reasons, but that would have definitely happened. So why, for a total of 10 hours, was Marilyn not looked after? Or there is no record of where Marilyn was and what happened to her in that time. What is weirder to me as well is that this has been found out. This isn't news that I found, just wandering the internet. This is, go on Google. It will say Marilyn Monroe's body was missing after she died. It's a thing. But people have found this out and now it's not investigated any further. Weird. If nothing sinister happened, wouldn't it just be an open and closed case, like, here's the report, oh, and then this vehicle broke down and this happened and, they rolled into a ditch and blah. Why do we not know why the journey took 12 times as long as it should have done? Alan Abbott, who helped prepare Marilyn Monroe's body for her funeral, was, in my opinion, incredibly disrespectful. For no reason whatsoever, he wrote down and made public how, and I'll quote, how she looked like a very average, aging woman who had not been taking very good care of herself. Can I just say, and I have never said this on my channel before, and I'd like to apologise in advance to anyone who finds this offensive, but fuck you, Alan Abbott. How incredibly rude. She was alone, she was depressed, she was not very well at all. She was likely scared and incredibly uncared for. Then you have that to say about her body after death. But then you further add about the condition of her manicure, how her hair is like growing out because she obviously wasn't a natural blonde. And then you comment as well about the length of her hair on her legs. You, sir, are disrespectful and you should be ashamed. Marilyn did, however, have a very beautiful funeral. She was dressed elegantly in a dress that she had previously worn. Her makeup had been done beautifully by one of her friends, and she was adorned with a beautiful bouquet of pink roses. She was laid to rest in a crypt in the Corridor of Memories. And Joe, her second husband, actually arranged for the next 20 years that 3 times a week, the vase next to her crypt would have red roses placed inside it. But even though she was laid to rest and the police did a very good job at keeping the crowds at bay and the media had very little access, Marilyn Monroe was still not safe. I told you we'd come back to Hugh Hefner, and now we're going to be speaking about him again. In 2017, Hugh Hefner died from natural causes. And where was his place of rest? Oh yes, in the crypt right next to Marilyn Monroe. Yes, that's right, the sick man who was obsessed with Marilyn Monroe and plastered photos of her in his magazine for a lot of money and no respect for Marilyn at all, decided in 1992 to purchase the crypt right next to her. He was quoted to have said, "I'm a believer in things symbolic. Spending eternity next to Marilyn is too sweet to pass up." Hugh Hefner was rotten, honestly. There's so much about him which is vile, but this is really, really gross. I really wish now, because it's been enough time and who cares about Hugh Hefner, honestly, like I wish someone would pay and just move him away from her, or there was a petition strong enough that he could just move away from her, like out of respect for Marilyn. One can hope, but who knows if that will ever happen. The other really upsetting thing as well is that Joe, Marilyn Monroe's second husband, had actually purchased the crypt above Marilyn as well, so that when they passed away, Joe would be in the top crypt and Marilyn would be in the one below, and they'd always be together. Romantic? Sure. But when they divorced, Joe decided that Marilyn could keep her crypt, but he no longer wanted his there. So he sold it to a wealthy entrepreneur called Richard Poncher. This crypt, as I say, was directly above Marilyn, and Richard actually told his wife Elsie that if she did not bury him so that he was face down, then he would haunt her forever. He wanted to be face down so he could lay on top of Marilyn forever. Disgusting. Elsie, Richard's widow, actually tried to sell the crypt so that she could pay off the mortgage on her home, and the eBay listing actually reached $4.6 million, but the sale actually fell through, so Richard is still there to this day. So that means potentially for eternity, Marilyn Monroe has her harasser next to her and a creep above her. So even in death, Marilyn Monroe is still being severely mistreated. That was a really tough video, right? What a way to start the videos of 2025. It was just something that I had read about a little while ago, but I never actually investigated and researched. Again, it's a difficult one because there is no concrete evidence. So this is speculation, but what is fact is that Marilyn Monroe's body did go missing and the police were not called for 4 hours after her death. So what do you think happened to Marilyn? Please let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I am so intrigued up to what you think. I would love to see comments of a nature that's positive. You know, no, potentially they didn't call because they had to do a crime scene investigation, or I don't know, something. I would love for that to be the case. I would love for it to be something extremely plausible and extremely positive, or something that isn't as sinister as it feels. But unfortunately, I just feel like Marilyn had an incredibly sad life, and even when she passed away, she still did not escape the clutches of objectification and control. Thank you for watching. Please go watch something fluffy or watch one of my other videos on something like Obscure Britain. They're a lot lighter than this one. But if you did like today's video and you want to give it a thumbs up, I would appreciate you so much. It helps this video get seen by other people. And if you would like to comment, then please do. And if you would like to subscribe, then you'll be very, very welcome, and I would appreciate you so very much. But until then, I do hope to see you in the next video, which should be coming out relatively soon. I will give you clues as to what that will be just before it goes live. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye for now. Sup. Sorry, don't ever start a video like that ever again.